Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. We've got a lot to go through today on this episode. Hopefully you caught our post-game podcast on Saturday evening coming out of Beaver Stadium for the first time in a while. We were back in there for the blue-white spring game. The Nittany Lions finished out their spring camp with their 15th practice session, did a lot of live scrimmage action during the second half, and we had a chance to break it all down initially coming out of that experience. And since then, we've had a chance to bring a lot more content your way over at lions247.com. We actually were able to put our heads together, Mark Brennan, Daniel Gallen, myself, with contributions from Grace Brennan, as always, our photographer, and put together a play-by-play breakdown from what we witnessed inside Beaver Stadium. It's probably not perfect, but we got you an unofficial box score there as well. No official stats provided by Penn State, no television broadcasts, no live stream of this game to follow along the way. So it's the best we could do to offer up kind of what went down in the building on Saturday for those of you who were not there. And we have that over at lions247.com. Daniel Gallen has a defensive notebook, 2,000 plus words breaking down what he saw from that side of the ball in Beaver Stadium. That was up on Monday evening. I'll have one up for you here on Tuesday, breaking down the offensive takeaways that we witnessed over the course of action in Beaver Stadium. And we're going to talk about a lot of that stuff right now with Daniel Gallen. Before we bring on Tyler Calvaruso a little bit later in this episode, we'll discuss the addition of Trebor Pena, the standout Syracuse receiver who's making his move to Penn State here in 2025, the third transfer pickup for that position room. We'll talk about the pursuit of linebacker talent, a couple different linebackers making their way to campus as Penn State looks to help itself out in that depth chart situation. And we'll also discuss the blue-white game impact on recruiting when Tyler Calvaruso joins us a little later down the line. But as I said, we begin with Daniel. We're just, less than 48 hours removed, or I guess it's a little longer than 48 hours. I'm trying to do live math is never my strong suit, but less than 60 hours, let's say, away from having our post-game podcast edition of this episode. And hopefully people caught that on Saturday. There was a lot of quick reactions coming out of this, a lot of kind of broad overviews of what we witnessed in a 10-8 team white win. This time around, we challenged ourselves to come up with 5 specific things that stood out to us, some storylines, position competitions, young standouts. And Daniel, we're going to get rolling on the defensive side of the ball because that's where we have a new coordinator. It was a splash hire with Jim Knowles, a lot of new pieces trying to make an impact on that side of the ball as well. So where do you begin in those takeaways?
I think the best part to begin, Tyler, is just big picture. Looking at this is a brand new defense. Like you said, it was a huge splash in terms of getting Jim Knowles to come over from Ohio State. And then considering some of the interpersonal dynamics that came out through the reporting of what we knew about what was happening at Ohio State, there's, I think, a lot of curiosity about what this is going to look like. And I think the early returns are very, very positive. And that is from talking to the players, especially a lot of young players. Given the way that things worked is that we had that second-year player availability back in February, a couple weeks after the hire. So the first player perspective we're getting on Jim Knowles is from some guys who haven't even been on campus for a year, and they seemed excited. And now to talk to them at the other side of the process, the excitement is still there. Like Kenny Woolsey was like glowing talking about Jim Knowles and what it's like to play in the system. So I think that stood out to me, is that the legitimate excitement that stood out going across. We've heard different things whenever there's a new defensive coordinator who comes in, and it seems like they shape things a little bit differently. Like when Manny Diaz came in, I think it was Jalen Reed talking about how he felt like that he was just playing, that he was reading and reacting, and that unlocked something for him. When Tom Allen came in, I remember Kobe King talking about Allen as a teacher and explaining why they're doing all of this stuff. And then with Knowles, the one common theme is that these players have a ton of trust in him, that they, where he tells them to go, they're going to go. What he tells them to do, they're going to do, because they believe that he's putting them in the best position. So I think that stood out to me. And then how that carried over onto the field, a lot of guys on that defense really flying around. For a spring game, it felt pretty physical. I know we mentioned that Kerry Jackson had a hit in the hole. I think he stopped Quentin Martin for no gain. I thought Lamont Payne coming up from safety had a couple nice stops, which, that's someone that we have not talked about much at all while he's been here. And also someone that I don't think he didn't have the Vavu Torre reputation of being hacksaw and, having that physical reputation. And then I thought Antoine Belgrave Shorter, who I'm going to write about a little bit later Tuesday and Wednesday, watching him just come screaming downhill on some of these blitzes, some of these run plays, that stood out to me. So I think overall it's a combination of the legitimate excitement that we've heard from these players and then seeing how they're playing on the field. I think that stands out to me about the defense.
Jim Knowles' first trip to game action, quote unquote game action in Beaver Stadium since he kept the Nittany Lions offense out of the end zone last fall on Ohio State's way to a national championship win. When we look at the quarterback play, and then I'll kind of take the mantle here and we'll go back and forth a little bit. Daniel was keeping really a close eye on defensive things. I was on offense, and Mark Brennan was on everything, trying to keep us on the down and distance and all the different stuff that we had to do for our play-by-play breakdown. But at quarterback, I thought the most impressive player comprehensively on the day from, again, one of 15 spring practice periods was Jackson Smolik. I said during the post-game podcast we did that he was smooth. That was probably the defining factor for him on the day. But he finished, again, by our unofficial box score, Daniel Gallen math here, Jackson Smolik, 10 of 13 passing, 113 yards, 1 touchdown. He had a couple nice scrambles as well. Big caveat with all this is quarterbacks aren't going to get hit. You got defenders kind of pulling up when they see the quarterback in their crosshair. So take that for what it's worth. But I thought Smolik overall did a nice job of keeping his eyes downfield when he faced some of that pressure. There was also some designed rollouts where I felt like he threw the ball pretty seamlessly while he was rolling and on the run. There wasn't a lot of issues with his fundamentals, which I thought was great in a live action setting because he had been removed from live action football for so long. We saw him involved last year on the practice field here and there, especially in the fall, but he was not full go. He wasn't facing a live defense, and ultimately on the field, we're not sure what he was doing because James Franklin told us, coming out of last year that he was a guy that they were looking forward to seeing more of, and they got to see it this spring. And I think we got to see a little bit of it on Saturday, and you saw some of that touch, the accuracy on some of those throws when he's on the move. He threw the 40-yard touchdown to Lyric Samuel. It was some busted coverage downfield. He didn't have to fit that one in a tight window. But I want to remind people that he was driving Team Blue down the field late. He played for both Team White and Team Blue. He had a chance to drive them to a winning score, whether it was a field goal or a touchdown. They were down by 2. They were on the edge of the red zone, and then Finn Fermanic, a backup tight end, ended up fumbling the ball away on a hit, and Team White recovered, and that was that. But Smolik in a couple of really interesting situations, one where he was able to lead one of only 2 touchdown possessions on the day, and then in another where he was the quarterback Penn State wanted to get a look at and kind of a come from behind 2-minute scenario. I thought he flourished in both of those opportunities. And again, it's a relatively small sample size with Jackson Smolik, who we haven't seen throw a pass in a real Penn State game. But going into the spring, I think that we kind of had Ethan Grunkemeyer maybe penciled in for that QB2 job, at least thinking he had the edge. I think exiting spring, now that Penn State has had a chance to see what Smolik looked like getting rid of some of that injury-related rust, I think we're erasing anything we wrote in pencil, and we're putting that big or down in that second spot. I think you alluded to that last episode. But coming out of this game, coming out of spring ball, I think a notable storyline beyond the starting lineup is Jackson Smolik, his ascension, and it looks like he is ready to go toe-to-toe with Ethan Grunkemeyer, not just to be next man up in 2025, but to be the heir apparent when Drew Aller is moving on to the NFL in 2026. So where do you land on defense for your second topic here?
I think that you have to look at where the biggest vacancy is in terms of Abdul Carter going to the NFL draft, being that number 3 pick, and trying to replace that. Can't replace him with one person. I don't even think you can replace him with 3 people, the way that Abdul Carter played last year. But there is a vacancy for a starting edge rusher spot opposite Denai Dennis Sutton. And we saw a couple different combinations of guys, a couple new faces, a couple old faces, a couple guys that we have not seen play football in a while, get the opportunity to put their best foot forward. And we didn't see Dennis Sutton do anything this spring. Understanding is that's nothing significant, and probably the product of a 16-game season. And so we got to see guys like Zariah Fisher out there. We have not seen him play football in a long time. And I think that when I saw him out there, he looked like someone who is in his 6th year of college football. Like, he is built, he looks sturdy. I thought that he flashed a couple times. The caveat for some of these players is that they were going up against the depth tackles. You're down on your third and fourth spot on the depth chart, given how the teams were set up. But I think Fisher, we've heard some good things about him, and his teammates, I think, really respect him, and he has their attention. So that stood out to me. There's like a whole mess of younger players that is going to be really interesting to sort through and see who can step up, who can earn a rotational role. I think we're expecting to see a lot from Max Granville, given where he was on the depth chart and what they asked him to do last year after Carter got hurt in the Fiesta Bowl. Granville was on Team White, so he was going up against that top offensive line unit. I just thought he looked really solid. He didn't necessarily have any reps where I was watching him where he blew me away, but he seems like someone who is very fundamentally sound with what he's doing. And I think that tracks with what everyone has said about him and having that professional approach and things like that. Looking at the redshirt freshman, Jalen Harvey had a really nice spin move at one point. He was credited with a sack at one point. And Malachi Williams did some interesting things too. I think he also had a sack. He was around the ball. Those two guys, we did not see much of them last year. We saw a little bit more of Harvey, and he flashed when he got a couple chances. But Williams is someone that you get really intrigued by because he was a little bit more of a project when he came in, bit of a longer, skinnier body. I think we both talked to him in February, and he discussed the work that he was putting in to really fill out and adjust his body. He's wearing number 20. I think there are some similarities between him and Adisa Isaac in terms of just how they look on the field. And to see Williams maybe take a bit of a leap or to be noticeable in that way, maybe you can see him potentially challenging for a spot in the rotation, or maybe he's someone you at least have to think about a little bit more. And going with the wrap up with the defensive ends, Ivan Kamaju, really intriguing. He still looks skinny. As I wrote in my notebook, I think some of it might have to do with the fact he's wearing number 99. That that's such a big guy's number, and we're so used to seeing like Keziah Izzard wearing that for the past 5 years, and so it looks a little big on him, but he just has some tools and can do some different things. Athletic, good speed. He was another guy who ended up in the backfield a couple times. I'm very curious to see where he is in his physical development. They're listing him in the 240s. I forget what they listed him at on signing day, but it was much lower than that, probably 220s, maybe 210s. So we'll see. Like, that's someone that in the trenches, I always feel, outside of like a Denied and a Sutton type who comes in just like as a man, I'm always hesitant to ask too much of a freshman in the trenches early. But I think Kamaju is someone that we'll have to keep in the back of our mind. And then just two other names, Anai White, Deshaun Burnett. Anai White probably needs a little bit more work physically in this Penn State strength program. I thought that he looked like he held his own out there, just didn't do anything spectacular. Didn't really pop much. And then Burnett, a little bit more of a project, but had 1 or 2 reps where he was able to beat, I think it was Garrett Sexton on 1 rep, get in the backfield, get in the quarterback's face. So there's options here, and how this fits together is going to be interesting for Deion Barnes and constructing this rotation and figuring out what you can get from different guys at different points. But I think that coming out in spring, you feel confident in, I guess, kind of the whole of what you have on the edge.
On the surface, you might see this acquisition of a former top 100 prospect in Anai White from an SEC program at Texas A&M. You bring him in after you lose Abdul Carter, and you might say, well, there's a plug-and-play situation. Not so fast, where Anai White's coming off a lot of lost time down in College Station because of an injury issue. And additionally, I think to your point, it looks like he's still playing catch up a bit within this Penn State program. We'll see if he's in a better position to flash on the field come fall camp, but kind of getting his feet underneath him here with the new program. You can probably say some similar things about fellow former Texas A&M lineman TJ Shanahan, who's been getting work as a backup guard here at Penn State so far. Over at the receiver spot, which I know everyone wants to discuss all offseason as much as possible, that's a spot where I think we come out of spring camp, and I feel pretty confident in saying it's an upgraded room compared to 2024. and look, I know it's the standard is not very high when you're coming off a national semifinal game in which no one in that room actually called a pass, but you lose your top two performers there. You're replacing them with a really interesting mix of accomplished transfer players from different levels, but also this group of young talent that I for the first time in a few years, it feels like it really is prepared to pay off for Penn State here a few months down the line. It's these three true freshmen and a couple in particular that put together really strong springs, and then a redshirt freshman, I think, as well, in Tyseer Denmark. And so I think I'll start with our first look at Kyron Hudson and Devontae Ross in this kind of a setting. You and I discussed that quite a bit in our post-game podcast on Saturday, but they were popular targets for Drew Aller. I love that they were teamed up with Drew Aller, so we got a chance to kind of see what that rapport looks like. Hudson had more targets than anybody on the day, 5 of them. 2 catches for 37 yards. I think one was for 22, one was for 15. So some big production on those catches. Devontae Ross, a couple catches on 3 targets for 35 yards. He also had a carry that went, I think, for close to 10 yards on the day. He's a guy they're trying to get in space. And overall, I think you referenced this on the podcast that we recorded Saturday as well. They look very much what they were described as and what we got glimpses at on the practice field, where Hudson has this body control when he goes in the air. He's kind of a bigger presence that defensive backs have to deal with. And Devontae Ross is that shiftier player that you love to kind of watch him navigate the football field as lanes appear and as he kind of shimmies his way through things, can use his speed to his advantage. And of course, meanwhile, we get the news that we'll go address a little bit later with Tyler Calvaruso that Trebor Pena, 80-plus catches last year in a Syracuse uniform, did a lot of damage out of the slot. He is adding to the equation. But before we even get to him, come away very encouraged with Tyseer Denmark and also Kobe Howard, what they were able to do. It was a different afternoon for them on Saturday, but they both saw a lot of work in kind of getting balls near the line of scrimmage. Both of them were involved in the slot a bunch. I thought Tyseer Denmark kind of took over one possession for Team White. They ended up fumbling the ball away in Team Blue territory on a bad snap, but he had 3 catches for 40-plus yards during that drive. And I think Kobe Howard, I guessed what he did after the game. I think I said 5 catches for 16 yards. I was pretty darn close, Daniel. On the day for the freshman, 4 catches for 14 yards. So they were trying to spring him loose. They were getting the ball to him behind the line of scrimmage. My point here is, although we didn't maybe see the fireworks you'd like to see on those touches from Kobe Howard, I feel really good about how Penn State staff is currently feeling about that young talent. You throw in Lyric Samuel, someone who made multiple strong catches on Saturday, one of which was a 40-yard touchdown, and somebody who is finishing out the spring camp on a high note in the eyes of this coaching staff. And it just, to me, seems like, yes, there's Liam Clifford. Yes, there's Caden Saunders. Yes, there is Anthony Ivy. And if you can get those guys to take a next step in their careers, that's great. But you have national championship expectations. You can't be hanging your hat on that happening and requiring that to happen from those 3 guys. And so I think the way they've addressed this thing, what we've seen from those true transfer players, the sense of what we're getting from that young swell of talent, I truly do think this is an upgraded room. Will it be a legitimate strength for a college football playoff contender? That's the next part of the process. But I think turning it from a bit of an albatross for you in a national championship pressure cooker situation to a position room that you feel like you can go to war with and know what you're going to get, that's the first step you got to take. And I think we're seeing some strides made in that area. Daniel, I know you got some defense to get to, but if you got anything else to add on receiver, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, August 30th against Nevada, we'll finally be able to draw some conclusions and see this on the field against opponents and have some real conclusions. But it's the James Franklin thing about the offensive line a couple years ago. We got to see it, got to prove it. But I think I'm in the same boat as you, where I feel better about this room right now than maybe I did coming out of spring last year. So I think that says something. Going back over the defense, staying on the defensive line, looking at the interior, and we know what Penn State lost there. Keziah Izzard, Devon J. Thomas are moving on. Hakeem Beamon left last November. Alonzo Ford got sidelined late in the season. And we'll see, what his timeline is for coming back when we get closer to fall camp. So there's opportunity there. You get Zane Durant back atop that depth chart. Great place to be. I'm going to talk to Bud Elliott later today, and we know that Zane was one of Bud Elliott's guys coming out of Florida, and just I think the career that he's had has been, I think, a little underrated, just because he's shared time with Abdul Carter and Denai Sutton. But coming out of camp, hearing him get mentioned in terms of leadership, I think he won the leadership award alongside Dom DeLuca and Drew Aller, who were team captains last year. So I think that Zane Durant is going to be a real focal point of this team, vocally, on the field, emotionally. But he got veteran treatment on Saturday, so we got to see a lot of different guys. I think the top three on Team Blue who were rotating in, and we kind of viewed Team Blue as the first team, or the top group. We saw a lot of Ty Blanding, Xavier Gilliam, and Liam Andrews there. Blanding, through my very unofficial scorekeeping, had 5 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, and a sack. He was someone who was really active early. I was writing his name down a lot. We've talked about it before. He has that sort of similar body type to Zane Durant in terms of he's a little bit on the shorter side, very stout in his lower body, though. And I think that shows in how he moves and what he does on the interior. He's another one of these guys that we just haven't seen do a lot, in real game action. So he's kind of in that we'll see category, but I feel like coming out of camp, you can feel better about him. Gilliam is someone that flashed, had a couple nice reps, and we've heard a lot about him sort of on the other side of the coin, where he was the guy that if things went haywire at all last year in the playoff at defensive tackle, he was the next guy up. He talked about viewing this as an opportunity that he wanted to take advantage of, putting himself in position to have a role. And I think he's done a nice job of that. He's got a little bit of a different body type too. And I think he pairs well with what Durant and Blanding. Liam Andrews, meanwhile, was a total wild card going into Saturday. You've written about him earlier this spring. Our first time seeing him really on the practice field for extended periods of time. He dealt with injury stuff last year that kept him on the sideline. Seeing him out there, I mean, he has a different body type. He's listed at 6'4", 286 on the roster right now. I mean, that's some length, that's height. You talk about losing Joseph Mupoye to the transfer portal. I sort of envision, in the perfect world, you envision Mupoye as that kind of tall tree in the middle of that line that can maybe alter some passing lanes, use that athleticism to be disruptive. I think Andrews can do similar things like that. I mean, he like looked the part out there. He didn't look like a redshirt freshman getting his first like real extended action in Beaver Stadium. He looked like he knew what he was doing, and I think that's a real positive, for Penn State in terms of losing these guys and having to replace him. So I know that Andrews had I don't know if his recruitment was necessarily high profile, but it was much discussed on our message board. And, will he, won't he, what side of the ball is he going to be? He's someone that we've been hearing about and talking about a lot for a long time. And to finally see that on the field and get some, I think, positive data out of it was a big positive. On the other side, Randy Adarica, he was on Team White. I can see why James Franklin called him a pleasant surprise this spring. Moved well, body looked like it belonged out there, going up against that blue team offensive line. And the other guy, Owen Wafel, I think coming out of spring, I've probably higher on him maybe than any other player, just in terms of he's a redshirt freshman, didn't do anything last year at Michigan, didn't necessarily have a big recruiting pedigree. He played at the Hun School in Princeton, which is a good program, big time program. But comes out as a 3-star. You have these priors based on that, but he just has a different body type. He's very square, very rectangular in the middle of the line.
Who he reminds me of? I noted this in our practice notebook a couple weeks ago because they were alongside each other. Ty Blanding. I think those two have very similar frames.
Yeah, I don't know if it was the white jersey or what, but like Wafel just seemed so much wider than any other defensive tackle that they had. And that's something that stood out in some of these practice looks. And so, I'm very curious. Brian Doan caught up with his younger brother, Luke, who was on campus, and Luke Wafel's feedback was that Owen Wafel is thriving at Penn State. I think that he's someone that looks like he's developed physically and is putting that physical development onto the field, which is what you want to see, especially in spring, especially with a newcomer. So this group, like, there's a lot of reps there. Guys are really going to need to step up. Like, it's one thing to, in April, to say, like, oh yeah, I feel good about Liam Andrews. What's it going to look like going up against that Oregon offensive line in late September? So there's still work to be done there, but I was watching that position closely, and I think it's another thing similar to defensive end where you have the different puzzle pieces there. It's just a question of fitting them together and seeing, who is going to be, that guy next to Zane Durant.
One thing we reminded ourselves of, and maybe he reminded us of, is Liam Andrews still has that motor that was really apparent on the high school film and really stood out. Now he's, instead of about 260 pounds, he's about 290 pounds. And yeah, it definitely flashed. There was one moment where he got in the face of Ethan Grunkemeyer to force a throw downfield that you just wonder what it might look like as this kid puts it together in the months and years ahead. Over at running back, we had some commentary on this on Saturday evening as well, but we got a nice little bit of a compare and contrast with some of the younger competitors to take over that running back 3 job behind Nick Singleton and Katron Allen. Singleton and Allen were out there, they were active, but come second half when things got live, tackles were being made, those guys were watching. And so we got to see a couple in particular that I thought showed what they're about. Quentin Martin, to me, comes across as a chess piece for Andy Kotelnicki, and Tyke Hayes comes across as a hammer or a battering ram for Andy Kotelnicki, however you might want to use him. I know that we're used to Katron Allen running with a lot of physicality, running like he's angry at the opposing team. And I think you're kind of going to see some similarities in the approach downfield for Tyke Hayes as he gets loose, as he tries to work through the first line and then find some linebackers and safeties waiting for him at the next. You're going to see that aggression from him, but he's going to do it with a different physicality, a different body type. I've talked about he's a bigger guy, especially in that lower body than Nick, then Katron, then Quentin Martin, then Corey Smith. And I think that you're going to get a real opportunity here over the course of August camp and then into that out-of-conference action, even with Cam Wallace back in the mix, for this freshman to go out, rumble through some opposing defenses at the Division I level who aren't wearing Penn State pads. And if he brings that kind of aggression and he's falling forward and he's turning 3-yard gains into 6-yard gains, as James Franklin likes to say and likes to spotlight, then this guy's going to be a factor for this offense. He's going to be a factor on the running back depth chart. It's going to be tricky to see how much of a factor anyone can be in that room beyond the primary 2 seniors. But for whatever it's worth and whatever touches are going to be left beyond those 2, Hayes has put himself in a spot to really make a case going into the summer to command some of them. And then not Corey Smith, I'm sorry, who himself, we saw last year, had more exciting runs than any of the young running backs on the field in game days last Saturday. It wasn't a big performance for him in the Beaver Stadium. I want to focus more on Quentin Martin, who I mentioned looks fantastic when he's running routes. Looks great when the ball is being thrown his way. Also does some nice things with the ball in his hands. They gave it to him, I think, 4 or 5 consecutive times down inside the 10 to really maybe emphasize with him that he needed to get the ball in the end zone. Maybe they're trying to make a point with their offensive line. But for Team Blue at one stage, they went 4 or 5 straight carries with Quentin Martin until he finally got in and scored a touchdown. But I think what really stands out with me and continues to flash with me is the versatility he presents. And we know they're all about getting guys in space. We saw Liam Clifford getting some handoffs out of the backfield. We saw the same for Devontae Ross. It's been a consistent theme this spring for us in seeing some of these receivers getting touches out of the backfield as well. I'm curious, Daniel, kind of spinning it the other way. Can they find a way to get Quentin Martin touches beyond the backfield here in 2025? And whether it's 3 to 5 touches a game that forces a defense to be on its toes, it's something that we didn't see come to fruition his freshman year as he preserved redshirt. But it's really one of those things that you've gotten the toolkit right now for Andy Kotelnicki that nationally people aren't really going to be discussing leading up to kickoff. And so I think those two things, those two young running backs, what we've seen from them, just want to put that on the table. No disrespect to Corey Smith, just on this particular Saturday afternoon, we saw a little bit more from those two other guys. And then Jabri Wallace-Coleman makes his way to campus this summer as a freshman, and Cam Wallace continues to work his way back from a pretty serious injury last year, got on the field for some spring work toward the end. Daniel, what else for defense do you have before we start to work our way toward Tyler Calvaruso and some recruiting and transfer portal conversation?
Yeah, I'll keep my fourth point pretty short because we talked about it at length on Saturday, and you're going to talk about it with Tyler coming up. But just linebacker, I think it is what it is at this point, and I think Franklin's comments are notable to be that vocal, that public about looking for a linebacker and wanting a linebacker to add. It feels like at this point, given the personnel, there's a lot riding on Tony Rojas and what he can do this year. If he can take a step forward, maybe clean up some things that were, that hurt him in his game last year. I think a big thing for him is just going to be being healthy coming into the season and, being able to be at full strength for, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 games. I think that is something that, you can't really underrate. But yeah, I just think that, it is what it is. I'm curious to see how you can mix and match. This non-conference slate, I think, is going to be really important when you talk about what can you get from Anthony Specca, what is Keon Wiley in this situation. Kari Nelson, bit of a wild card, given that we saw, the trust to start him last year, but then not much after that. There's just some things that need to be sorted out. And then something else that I'll get to a little bit later is that they are in a good spot, though, because the secondary is so deep, and running a 4-2-5, you can alleviate some of the pressure that you have on these linebackers. But I'm interested to see how it shakes out and how much they can change the complexion of this room through the portal over these next couple of weeks.
There's definitely no layups like a guy that you like. This guy is definitely going to get 100 tackles for you if he's your starter, but it's starting to feel like the most faith in that room among guys that we don't know about. So the non-Tony Rojas, non-Dom DeLuca guys is heaped upon redshirt freshman Anthony Specca all of a sudden, who's sporting a beautiful mustache coming out of spring ball, and he's a guy that really is in the light right now for that room. But as we'll get to with Tyler Calvaruso in just a matter of minutes, there are other linebackers to know who are not in a Penn State uniform, but could be by the time preseason camp rolls around. A point I wanted to make on offense as well as we work our way through these. An extended look in the trenches on both sides of the ball. Daniel did a great job breaking down what he saw at tackle and end. Just a few notes on some of the rising offensive line talent that we saw for Penn State. Got a lot of work for a couple tackles in particular. Redshirt freshman Garrett Sexton got a lot of run at right tackle. We also saw Owen Alicine get quite a bit of run at tackle. Although Nolan Rucci resurfaced on the practice field late in spring camp, he was not out there for the blue-white game in action. Anthony Donko is still working his way back from injury. And so it was the starting five that we anticipated, that we've seen quite a bit, especially since J.B. Nelson left the conversation. You had Javen Williams at left tackle, or you had Drew Sheldon at left tackle, Javen Williams at right tackle, and then on the interior is Cooper Cousins on the left side, Venga Ioane. I'm screwing this up. Venga Ioane back on the left side, Cooper Cousins on the right side, and Nick Dawkins at center. We saw Venga bounce back and forth a bit this spring. I thought it was notable that when a lot of those guys stepped to the side, particularly the guys who've done a lot in Big Ten action, Cooper Cousins remained up there. He got a lot of work deep into this game, and he was really impressive. I saw him doing a lot of talking among his teammates. I think we've seen that before and after games as well. He's a vocal guy, really going to lend his support to teammates across every position. I don't know if he's going to be a team captain as a sophomore, but you can kind of pick that up just following him along, body language, the way he handles himself, play to play. But really, this guy wreaks havoc at the second level. That's where he's at his best. And I think it's a lot of fun to watch him get loose and to watch running backs try to keep up with him in some ways and try to race him to the hole that he's going to create. I mean, this guy can move so fluidly. I think he's really restructured his body a little bit in year two. Always been a huge bodied player going back to high school, but he's just moving at a different athletic level right now, it would appear. The aggression has always been one of his elite traits. And so it was a real pleasure to watch him. But I thought watching him on the field during the second half, and it was Team Blue's long-awaited touchdown march that ended up getting into the end zone with Quentin Martin. And it was Cousins at right guard. It was Michael Troutman at center. And it was Owen Alasine at right tackle, I think, at that stage. And so you had two true freshmen protecting your starting quarterback and Drew Aller. And no one was going to sack Drew, but there was some risk involved there. I thought it said a lot about where things stand with Troutman, who's developed really nicely as an interior presence during his first semester on campus. He's going to be one of those guys to know future names at center. And then with Owen Alasine, who everyone will tell you has really laid a strong foundation for himself, probably further ahead than maybe people in that building expected he would be coming out of spring ball. So there'll be a lot of talk about what's at the top of this offensive line group, and Cooper Cousins is in that conversation now. But I thought we got a pretty good look at some of the other pieces, Garrett Sexton, Owen Alasine. And unfortunately, that's the big reason why I'd love to be able to watch a television review. And I know I'm preaching to the choir out there, is to get a longer look at some of what these guys did. But the good thing was when I saw them taking some lumps, and I should include Alex Birchmeier here, right? Because I thought he played as good as we've seen him in a live setting. We've seen him in some spring games before. We've seen him in some non-conference cupcake matchups before. I thought he was more in control than at any point. So to get a longer look, you start to get a better appreciation for maybe the offensive linemen who are going to be numbers 8 through 14 or 15 on the list versus the top 5 or 6 guys in that group. Daniel, your fifth and final point to get to on defense. And folks, there's a huge defensive notebook that Daniel put together over at Lions247.com with a lot more breakdown in that.
Yeah, one last thing on the offensive line to go off what you said. I mean, I thought Owen Alasine was really, really impressive on Saturday. I mean, that's something that, kind of like I said with the defensive lineman, true freshman, you keep your expectations at a pretty, I think, low baseline. Cooper Cousins is an exception in that regard when he came in last year. But I thought Alasine held his own, and Grace Brennan, when she was going through photos on Saturday, texted me that, something along the lines of like, is it just me, or did Owen Alasine have a, good game? So I think that he's catching eyes, and Franklin had some good things to say about him last week.
Let me add this. He's 6'7". He's about 280 pounds right now. So this is a very early glimpse at what we expect to be a fun developmental effort for Phil Trautwein, for Owen Alasine, who was actually at left tackle on that possession. I screwed that up too. Left tackle is where we saw him on the practice field as well.
Yeah, Phil Trautwein has a type, I think, in recruiting and developing now. I think that's pretty clear. My last point, I'm going to go to the secondary on defense. We know that it's a really deep and competitive area, and we're still in wait-and-see mode for how exactly it's going to look. No Zion Tracy, no King Mack. Those are two of the names that have been out there for that fifth defensive back spot for a while. We saw Tracy man that last year after KJ Winston got hurt and Jalen Reed switched from the Lion to a more traditional safety. I thought Tracy played a more traditional slot as opposed to the Lion when he was the fifth defensive back out there. And I thought that he made some strides. That pick 6 against Ohio State, great highlight for a young player to have. King Mack is someone that, talking to KJ Winston at Pro Day, Winston was asked, who should we think about for that fifth DB spot? And he said King Mack. And we know that in the building that King Mack is someone that they really like. They're happy he's back. He's he's a unique portal story at this point in terms of leaving, coming back. And it sounds like he really picked up where he left off from a personality standpoint. And also rejoining the team, even though he was away for a year, he can be at a similar level as a lot of these guys, given that it is a new defensive coordinator and a new system. Unfortunately, we didn't get to see much of him. So without those two, we saw a lot of Colin Dinkins and a lot of Kenny Woolsey. I think both of them played every snap on their respective teams, and they're in the slot the whole time. With Dinkins, great athlete. We know what his brother does at tight end. They got the NFL bloodlines, but This time last year, we were having a similar conversation about Colin Dinkins in terms of this is a guy we saw a lot of in the blue-white game. He held his own. He flashed every once in a while. And then once we got, down to, the games got to September, he was a non-factor. He was a core special teamer. So is he going to insert himself into that conversation? And then with Wosley, he was kind of funny talking about the slot spot where he talked about he's a physical player. He's like 5'10", 170, 180. So people don't think he can be physical, but he believes that he is, and that, that's how he plays. That's his attitude. And he said he's been working at that position since the end of last year, but this spring was really the first time he could really dedicate himself full time to, I think, being a little bit more developed there. And he feels like he's done a nice job in that spot. So it's interesting. I think also the other factor you think about, is it going to be a corner? Is it going to be a safety? I think Antoine Belgrave Shorter is putting his best foot forward. We know that Dejon Lane and Zachy Wheatley are probably your top two at safety coming in. And then is Darius Dixon going to factor in? That's something I wrote about a little bit in the notebook, is that, we know that AJ Harris, Elliott Washington, Aldavian Collins, they're going to all play starter reps. But can Darius Dixon maybe do what we saw Kalen King do in 2021, where, he's still playing a lot of reps, but it's kind of a tick down from the starters, but there's still a willingness to have him on the field when the game is in the balance. That's the one thing that I think that was my first year on the beat. So first year seeing how Terry Smith is handling things. And it's always kind of stood out to me that in that Michigan game, when they give up the big touchdown pass to Eric All, like Kalen King is out there as a true freshman when they had a couple other veteran DBs on that roster. So we know that if they trust you, they're going to put you out there. So, is Darius Dixon going to be a potential green light? Is he going to be, maybe that fourth corner who can spell guys? I think that you feel good about what Penn State has on the back end. But I guess it's a common theme for each level of the defense, is that you have all the pieces. And I think we know on the outside how it's going to look. And we know directly in the middle, it's Zachy Wheatley, how it's going to look. It's just those other spots, what kind of body types, what kind of players, what kind of approach is going to be there.
And Daniel, the last thing I'll note, kind of how you said it was an incomplete competition for that fifth defensive back because of some of the guys who were not involved with Zion Tracy and King Mack. And I'll say the same deal about tight end, in terms of what we witnessed at Beaver Stadium, what the quarterbacks, what the offensive coordinator, what the coaches were able to work with there in Beaver Stadium. It was shortchanged at tight end. Andrew Olish was in uniform, but we didn't see him out there involved in game action. I don't believe we saw him at our last look at practice either. We didn't see Luke Reynolds at our last few looks at practice. We did see him doing some conditioning work in Haluba Hall during that process, but he was not in uniform for this game, nor was Andrew Rappelier, who's been sidelined since he suffered an injury last September. But all three of those guys going to be very much part of the factor in that room in the fall, and especially Luke Reynolds. I'm really curious to see what happens with Andrew Rappelier coming off of that injury and how much he's able to really get going in the month of August when he gets back in a uniform and can really go full go. But Luke Reynolds is the one I think who has us all in kind of high alert right now based on his trajectory, his projection in year two, with Khalil Dinkins solidly in place as Penn State's top tight end as a redshirt senior, but we know it's a two-man show often at that spot. And so if you were looking for a little more on some of those tight ends that we're all kind of salivating over and everyone's tantalized by, we didn't get that in Beaver Stadium, but there was a reason behind that because we're not really seeing some of these guys right now. Daniel, great work covering this thing. It was a wild event, a little bit different than normal, certainly, without the TV broadcast, without a press box, and with learning the rosters a couple hours before we got to the building. But cool experience overall. We got a lot of content over at Lions247.com. Go check out our play-by-play breakdown, unofficial box score from the blue-white game. Daniel has a defensive notebook. I'll get one up on what we witnessed from offense. A lot of this, what you heard here in this conversation, but certainly a few other nuggets as well that didn't make it to the podcast. Daniel, appreciate the perspective as always. We're going to jump over to the portal and recruiting portion of the episode now with Tyler.
Now the show really starts. Thanks, Tyler.
That's right. See you, man. As promised, let's talk about a lot with Tyler Calvaruso. We got to begin with the fact that Penn State strikes into the transfer portal yet again, bringing in Trebor Pena. That news surfacing on Saturday, just as we were all getting settled into Beaver Stadium. Ultimately, Pena on campus. He was in town about a week and a half ago to take a look after he hit the portal from Syracuse. And Tyler, you and I are going to spend some time discussing the pursuit of linebackers because there are some things happening there in the portal. We're going to talk about some blue-white game impact on recruiting, a few in particular, but we got to begin with Penn State. Again, a trio of transfer players. We talked about Kyron Hudson and Devontae Ross on this past segment and what they were able to do in Beaver Stadium. Now Trebor Pena is on the clock to make his debut August 30th against Nevada, coming off an all-conference season in the ACC, 80-plus catches, nearly 1,000 yards on the season, 9 touchdown catches, and a bunch of work out of the slot for the Orange.
This is about as good of a move Penn State could have possibly made, I think, during this spring transfer portal window. We said it time and time again leading up to the beginning of spring ball and leading up to the beginning of the spring window. If a high-level wideout presents itself in the portal, there's a very good chance Penn State was going to be involved. We weren't sure if that kind of a player was going to present itself because the spring window is always really unpredictable. We touched on it. You just don't know who's going to hit. Some guys, they enter the portal because, they're not cutting it at their current school. Others, like Pena, they're just seeking a fresher and potentially bigger opportunity. And he's definitely going to have that opportunity at Penn State because the Nittany Lions are going to be counting on him to be an uberly productive wideout for them in 2025. The kind of reliable inside presence Drew Aller really needs and what this Penn State offense and the wide receiver room in specific really needs. Because I think the trio that the Nittany Lions have assembled, the transfer portal trio the Nittany Lions have assembled this offseason, it just raises not just the floor of what this team can accomplish this upcoming season, but the ceiling as well. Because you're not just counting on young players now. And Penn State likes what it has in regards to young talent, but you have brought in 3 proven talents. And when it's all said and done, I followed Pena for a really long time, dating back to his high school career. I kept an eye on him when he got to Syracuse. This past season was when he really blew up. But seeing the strides that he took for the Orange this past season, really coming into his own, he has a really strong case to be the most impactful wideout Penn State added out of the portal this offseason. That's not a slight at Hudson. That's not a slight at Ross. It just speaks to who Trebor Pena is, who I believe he is going to be as a player for Penn State. Good hands, good route runner, really, really impressive when it comes to the short area spaces. He can make defenders miss. He has a track record going back to 2024 of getting it done against some of the ACC's higher level competition. I know the ACC wasn't exactly the best conference in college ball this past season, but he delivered some really, really impressive performances. And Penn State is hoping that he can parlay the 2024 success into even more success in 2025. It's the kind of get that changes the dynamic in that wide receiver room for sure.
He had 11 catches against Cal, 10 catches against Stanford. Some of the more spotlight games for this Syracuse team, though, 128 receiving yards on 6 catches against Miami the final week of the regular season. Big loss for the Hurricanes, big upset win for Syracuse on their way to a 10-win campaign. And then 2 touchdown catches in a Holiday Bowl win over Washington State. He finished the season hot. He was a big-time presence. You mentioned the other 2, and then the paths everybody takes are different. You've got Kyron Hudson, who was a blue-chip caliber talent from a powerhouse program in Southern California, stayed home, went to USC, became a starter there. You've got Devontae Ross, who initially signed with Kentucky out of high school, didn't end up there, ends up at a lower level of college to play in the Sun Belt against Troy, has his big breakout last year. Pena is a guy who barely made it to the power conference level. You look at his offer sheet, he had military service academies on there. He had FCS programs trying to get him to campus. Syracuse brings him on board. Takes 3 or 4 years for him to really take that next step and become a player that everyone is aware of. And so how much are you going to trust that Trebor Pena can carry that over to Penn State based on the lack of that big-time prospect profile and the lack of productivity at the college level until Syracuse goes boom, becomes one of the most prolific passing attacks in the country last year with their way their coaching staff ran things and Kyle McCord at quarterback. And so what is leading you to believe that this will be a carryover? And as you said, he could prove to be the most impactful of all 3 transfer pickups at receiver.
First things first, I think the new Syracuse staff under Fran Brown deserves some credit because I think they unlocked some aspects of his game and fine-tuned certain aspects of his game that, quite frankly, probably weren't as refined under the previous regime. I think that's a big reason why he was able to break out this past season. And I think now that he's at Penn State, Marcus Hayes will continue to keep him trending in the right direction, continuing to grow in areas where he needs to grow. The other encouraging thing for me personally with Pena is if you look at Syracuse's passing attack, and yes, Kyle McCord was the leading passer in terms of yardage in college football this past season, and they aired it out early and often. That was the Syracuse game plan in Fran Brown's first year as the head coach out there. But Pena wasn't just a volume performer. They spread the ball around nicely. It wasn't an instance where he was just getting fed over and over and over again, and no one else was. Yeah, he got plenty of targets, no doubt about that. You don't accumulate 84 catches on the year without a ton of targets, but it wasn't just him. Sometimes you see offense, you see guys who are at the portal, and they are the sole centerpiece of their respective offense, and there's not a whole lot going on beyond them. And then they go to their next stop. Things are a little bit different. You see the production tail off a bit. Things just change for them in one way or the other. Pena operated in an offensive scheme and a wide receiver room that it was a well-balanced room. There were a lot of targets to go around. There were a lot of passes caught to go around, and Pena just happened to be at the forefront of that. So I think all of that put together, skill set-wise, proven production-wise, again, I know it's just one season, and it's not the biggest sample size compared to some of the other guys out there that you see hit the portal year to year. But I think it's a sample size Penn State could look at and say, hey, look, in our system with Drew Aller under center at quarterback, with the way we're going to dial things up with Andy Cole, Nicky in the booth, I think they can continue to unlock Pena, who he is as a player, and make the most of that skill set, and make the most of a reliable inside slot receiver who can be that guy that Drew Aller can turn to in tough times. And just he's going to make plays. I'm confident in this one.
There's no one on the roster who came back who has even 10 catches on their career other than Liam Clifford. And Liam Clifford's most productive season to this point, last season, was 18 total receptions. We got a lot of love for some of these younger players, Tyseer Denmark and Kobe Howard and Lyric Samuel coming along. We talked about them a lot in the last segment, but you need these three to deliver for you. And Marcus Higgins has been talking about the major sense of urgency in his room. You can feel it across the program. And we discussed it when they brought in Jim Knowles. We discussed it when they turned around and after losing Jaywan Sider, they go in and get Stan Drayton, considered maybe the best college football running back available and generally speaking. And we also discussed it when they had a big roster retention success with getting both running backs and Denai Dennis Sutton and Zane Durant on board. How much has Penn State stepped up to the plate financially from what you've gathered and its ability to build a national championship caliber roster in 2025? Because let's not forget, we're about 2 weeks removed from Pena's exit from Syracuse, having a lot to do, at least publicly, with people pointing towards NIL and the money he might have been looking for, the money that Syracuse may not have been able to produce. And I recall a couple of years ago when you and I are talking about transfer portal receivers, they're pricey and Penn State might not be able to afford them right now. Certainly seems like that's no longer the case.
I'm actually glad you let in with that because really, I was going to say we broached the subject when we first discussed Pena, and we discussed the financial numbers that have been tossed around publicly and privately, and the reality of some of those numbers being, just not really what it was Pena was looking for. The 2 million number that was out there, I mean, that wasn't really aligned with reality. But I laid it out. I believe I laid it out pretty clearly that Penn State was going to have the ability to be competitive in this market, whether it be for Pena or someone else. They were going to have the ability to be competitive in the transfer portal market and upgrade where they needed to upgrade and not have dollars and cents, deprive the Nittany Lions and deprive James Franklin of the opportunity to add an impact player for what could potentially be a special season in State College. And you're seeing it with some of the visits that are also coming together beyond Pena. The cupboard's not bare. It's not ending with Pena. They're bringing in some talented linebackers, one on campus here on Tuesday. And, there is still money to go around. So Penn State continues to make strides in that area. They continue to maintain the ability to be competitive in that area, which is the biggest thing, because if you could put together comparable NIL packages, let's be honest about the situation that Penn State has going for itself here right now. How many other programs can sell the things Penn State could sell? How many other programs could sell, being on the doorstep of making a national title game and being able to consistently compete for the ability to make a national title game? There's not many. The list is not long. So when you could be competitive in the financial space along with the programs who have similar pitches, you're going to be 100% better off than you were previously a couple of years ago. Like you said, where the conversation, it was a little bit different. That's just the fact of the situation. There were some players Penn State wasn't able to get in on, like an Oregon, like a USC, some of the NIL power players that we've come to know since NIL kickstarted and since the transfer portal has become what the transfer portal has become. But Penn State, they're able to fight that fight. That's why a guy like Trebor Pena is on board. That's why they're going to continue looking deep into this spring window to see any reinforcements they can bring in. Because, like I said, the cupboard's not bare. They can keep working on that regard.
Yeah, let's talk about it, because the bank account has not been wiped out yet, and this roster still does have needs. They're going to add another wave of freshmen this summer, but when you're talking about impact additions at this point in the calendar, usually you're talking about some college experience, and now we're looking toward linebacker. Receiver, they've done their diligence. We wondered if they'd take care of business there. Yes, check, check, check. James Franklin was public. I asked him a question on Saturday. How do you feel about your linebacker depth? He spun that question after addressing the depth to saying, we need more linebackers. We're looking at the portal. And he took advantage of a public spotlight to put that out there. And it hasn't taken long for a couple of the particular names to surface here, and one of which is a Big Ten veteran. They were looking for a 7th-year home at the college level, and Mohamed Toure. He's got multiple years that he's lost due to injury on his college track record. He's also got multiple years where he was a standout with the Scarlet Knights of the all Big Ten caliber. So talk us through this one. A guy who's played a ton of football. He missed all of last season with the knee injury, and his younger brother, Vabu, is a second-year safety on the Penn State roster, making his way up that depth chart conversation himself at defensive back. So, Tyler, a lot of pieces to this one, a lot of history involved with Toure, and what do we make of him making his way to campus?
Really productive player when healthy. I think the numbers speak for itself. I think the All Big Ten nod speaks for itself, but we're talking about 2 ACL injuries here, so I think a really important aspect of this visit for Penn State is to check out that knee and see where Toure stands right now. That said, I don't think the Nittany Lions would have welcomed him onto campus if there wasn't optimism about the way things are going in that regard, but they're going to get a much-needed closer look while he is in town. And the production is undeniable when he's on the field. He offers you positional versatility. He can get after the opposing quarterback. He can play that traditional linebacker position. So you can plug him in a couple different spots, and he could thrive for you. He showed that in Piscataway. I think wherever he lands next, as long as he's healthy, as long as that knee is up to snuff and he could stay on the field and he's the same player that he was during the 2023 campaign, he's going to be an impactful linebacker for someone. But the knee is it's undeniably a big part of the equation and the conversation with Toure moving forward. If everything checks out, it'll be very interesting to see where things go between the two sides because, like I said, they're not done at linebacker. They're not limiting themselves to just this one visit. We'll get into that in a little bit. But Toure's a good player. He's a veteran. He's been around. He knows what it takes to succeed in the Big Ten, which I think is paramount for a team that has serious national title aspirations. Some guys, they come to the Big Ten and they don't adjust well. It doesn't go well for them. Mohamed Toure knows all about the Big Ten, knows about the physicality, knows what it takes to succeed against offensive linemen in the Big Ten, knows what it takes to keep those talented, slippery running backs scattered throughout the conference and get into the next level and hurting you. So all of those traits, if the medicals check out and things are what they need to be there, it could definitely be a potential impact get for Penn State.
He was listed at 6'2", 235 on Rutgers' roster, a guy that really did shine getting after the quarterback during his career. In 2023, when he was an all Big Ten selection, 94 tackles, 9.5 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks. Does Toure strike you as somebody that if Penn State were able to kind of sell him on a vision and maybe find a role for him defensively? Because, again, last year, year 7, it's got to make sense for him to make this move as well. Does this seem like a guy who could maybe be a bit of a pass rush specialist? Do you kind of put that into the equation? Because Daniel and I just spent a lot of time breaking down the blue-white game. There's a lot of young defensive ends. They added Anai White out of Texas A&M, but Zariah Fisher's back as well off an injury, and you love what Denai Dennis Sutton brings to the table. But this is a guy who's done it. He's gotten after quarterbacks in the Big Ten. He's gotten home in the passing pocket. Do you see that as being a potential part of the arsenal here if Penn State makes the move and if Toure sees the fit?
I anticipate it being part of the pitch for sure because, like you said, his time is limited in college. He doesn't have a whole lot of time left. So this decision is going to be huge for him because he wants to land in the place where he can produce at the highest clip, where he feels the most comfortable operating in scheme. And the ultimate goal is to get to the NFL. So he wants to shine in a system that plays to his strengths. And I think Penn State has shown time and time again, whether it be on the offensive side of the ball with Andy Kotelnicki pitching to prospects, now the defensive side of the ball with Jim Knowles pitching to prospects. Look, we're going to play to your strengths. We're not going to plug you in where you're not comfortable. We're not going to plug you in where you're not going to succeed, and we're not going to plug you in where you can't thrive. If you could get after the passer for it or get after the quarterback for us as a pass rusher, we're going to let you do that. If you can make plays against the run as a linebacker, you can do that for us. Wherever that skill set plays, that's where Penn State is going to plug a guy like Torrey in. So I'd anticipate that's definitely part of the pitch. I think there's versatility here. I think the Nittany Lions see that and view Torrey as, Jim Knowles, we all know he's the mastermind, he's the mad scientist back there with his defense. Torrey can be viewed as a chess piece, I think. I think you can put him on the board and line him up, let him get after it, and I think he's going to make plays for you.
And as you said, there's multiple names right now on the radar for Penn State. Another that the Nittany Lions are set to host for a visit this week, Amari Campbell out of North Carolina. That's a Tar Heels program now led by Bill Belichick, 6-time Super Bowl champion. They have added a couple of former Nittany Lions defensive linemen this offseason. Smith Vilbert was the first to go that route. Now Joseph Mupoye has popped up with the North Carolina transfer class, but maybe we'll see if there's a bit of a trade in process here, because this is someone who, you look at the productivity, that was there for him too. 6.5 sacks last year, 76 tackles. And by the way, just to add on Torrey, each of his last 3 seasons where he's been available to play at the college level, at least 4 sacks all of those seasons. So Campbell, though, what do we make of this process? Because he's a guy who has multiple years of eligibility. He's got the stats you can point toward last year, and he's somebody that I'd imagine should have a lot of schools involved, because you got a proven commodity at the power conference level. It's getting to be May, and if anybody in college football right now feels like they need to fix things at linebacker, he should be a very desirable target. So how is Penn State positioned with him at this stage?
I love Amari Campbell. I think he's a really good player, and this one excites me really because I watched him a little bit at North Carolina last season. Whenever North Carolina, got the chance to see him play, and he was just all over the place making plays. And I don't even look at the statistical production with Campbell either. Really, he's a leader. He had that green dot for UNC. He was a big time leader on that defense for the Tar Heels in 2024. And you can add a guy like that this late in the game if you're Penn State. I mean, that's a potential game changer for your defense, in my opinion. I think Campbell's skill set and his built-in leadership ability makes him a really high-level transfer portal target. And I think about it. You bring in a player who has that track record of success and plug him into a Jim Knowles defense that can operate at a high level as things already stand. A guy like Campbell could really just take things to the next level. And you're right. Any program that needs linebacker help should be in on a player like Amari Campbell. He's that talented. I think he's that good. When he gets to Penn State, he's going to be coming off a visit to SMU. We all know SMU has some deep pockets. So I'm very interested to see and learn more about the financial aspect of Campbell's portal recruitment, because I anticipate, and based on some of the things I've heard, it will be a higher dollar one compared to some others. But I mean, look at the caliber of player we're talking about. You get what you pay for, right? Campbell's a really good player. He's not going to come cheap, but the good news for Penn State, you can fight that fight. You're not done. So,
well, the theme this offseason has really been, Tyler, like Penn State loses a piece and you're like, oh, this wasn't really expected. What are they going to do to counter it? And then they go out and they make a pretty big move that actually makes you think they may be better off in 2025 than they were in 2024. You lose Tom Allen a week after the Orange Bowl. What do? Well, you go and get Ohio State's defensive coordinator. You make him the highest paid assistant coach in college football. You lose Jaywan Sider in early February. Oh, my gosh, this guy's been a staple of your program for so long. How do you replace him? Well, you go and get Stan Drayton, who people think is the best running backs coach in college football and has the resume that shows it. And now what do you do when you lose Tamir Robinson? Oh, my gosh, this guy is a rising presence. He's going to be battling on the 2-deep. He's going to have an uptick in snaps. Well, he's off to USC. Sounds like you could replace him with people who have a lot more experience and have proven a little bit more at the college level, albeit Torrey with an injury issue in his history. And so let me ask you this. Is there a potential where in looking to address linebacker, Penn State adds multiple players? Or are you of the mind that right now it's more of a one-and-done situation at linebacker?
I think that conversation's still open. I think it will depend how things play out these next couple days and, in the coming weeks as well. I think with a player like Torrey, we've touched on his versatility skill set wise. Maybe what he does well allows you to take both if everything makes sense, because Campbell's more that traditional linebacker type. Torrey could do different things for you. So, again, I think the conversation is going to continue. I also don't think they would bring both guys on campus for visits if they didn't think there was a scenario where both could wind up working out for them in at least some capacity. So it's definitely an ongoing and open-ended thing internally.
Any other positions that we should be keeping tabs on? I think the book is closed on receiver at this stage. I think the book is closed there. But in terms of beyond linebacker right now, you're just trying to fine tune this thing, make sure you get to fall preseason camp with a roster that's ready to roll, and you feel like you've addressed any potential shortcomings that could trip you up as you try to go win your first national championship in about 40 years. So, Tyler, any other spots that you have it on good authority that Penn State is at least exploring to address?
Still keeping an eye on D tackle as expected. Any opportunity. Yeah, Penn State likes what it has internally right now, especially with the young guys who have made some waves behind the scenes. But any opportunity to get to upgrade in the trenches is an opportunity Penn State's going to take. Don't have any hard names on that right now. I think they're still scouring the market, seeing what pops up, see if a guy who could be a potential fit pops up. If it is going to be a D tackle addition this offseason in the spring window for the portal, I think it's going to be a more experienced player as opposed to a younger guy with multiple years of eligibility. I think that's the route Penn State would go. If they added D tackle, I think they would go a similar way at safety if the opportunity presents itself as well. So those are the two positions I'm keeping an eye on beyond receiver, which obviously Penn State has already addressed, and linebacker, which is an ongoing scenario. D tackle, safety. We'll see if anything comes about on those two fronts. Nothing concrete right now, but it's on the radar for the staff.
Tyler Calvaruso gets it done for us on a daily basis over at Lions247.com. You hear him from time to time here on the podcast, but get all of his coverage over at the website every single day. He's got you covered with recruiting, which we'll get to later on this week. We're going to stash that for later. We got some blue-white recruiting feedback, some takeaways there. We're going to also discuss the remaining freshmen who still need to get to campus. Tyler has really good perspective on them. So next time we have him here on the podcast, we'll get into that. We're also going to talk about Trebor Pena a bit more with an insider from Syracuse to get to know about his time with the Orange more and what he's bringing to Happy Valley. So that's what we have to look forward to on the next episode. But Tyler, always appreciate hopping on. Thanks for giving us what you had on this version of the Lions 24/7 podcast.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Good stuff from Tyler. Before him, you heard from Daniel Gallen. I'm Tyler Donahue. And as always, you can view this on YouTube. You can download it or listen to it wherever you find your podcast. And we appreciate any of those 5-star ratings you feel like throwing our way if you like what we're offering on a podcast basis. Check out the website, our coverage there. We're doing a lot of writing for this material as well. We'll come to you with the second episode later this week. For now, stepping aside, I'm Tyler Donahue. This has been the Lions 24/7 podcast.